All right. Good morning to some of you, and good afternoon to others on the eastern coast. My name's Ethan. I'm going to be taking you through today's masterclass, the first of a series in 2024. And today we're going to be focusing on some management grids. So I hope you'll got a coffee, sit down, strap in, and let's kick on. So first, we'll just quickly cover, generally speaking, what we're going to be talking about today, which is going to be the out-of-the-box management grids within Sybiz Vision. Many of you, of course, use custom grids, custom inquiries. Obviously, we're going to just put those in a box off to the side. We're just going to focus on those default ones. We're going to quickly break down each of the grids, at least in general terms. We won't go through every single one because many of them are extremely similar. Quickly, what functionality exists within them, and a couple of hopefully useful examples. So in relation to sort of who this webinar is targeting, it's going to be mostly people within the sales and purchase functions within your organizations. Of course, those that are using Vision, particularly those that I would say aren't using the management grids already. Of course, we do hope that those who are already using the management grids might learn a trick of a trade or two, something that might boost the old efficiency. But again, those who aren't really actively using those management grids, I think you're going to see the most benefit. Service and CRM, we sort of see as a bit of an advantage to a lesser degree. We're going to cover some mini management grids within those workflows, but they're certainly not the focus. And I just wanted to note quickly that throughout, we are sort of assuming that you've got some general Vision knowledge. As I said, this isn't really a baseline tutorial to Vision. We're going to assume you know what a sales order is and a sales invoice and how those generally interact within the software. And yeah, assume you've got that sort of very basic knowledge of how the software works, should be good to go. So ultra high level quickly, what is a management grid, or how do we define it? Because there's a lot of grids in the software, of course, like the products grid, for example, and I certainly wouldn't call that a management grid. That's far more just a bit of information. So I would say that the main definition of the management grid is an out-of-the-box functional grid which serves a specific purpose for an element of a workflow. So again, primarily these are going to be sales and purchases. We're going to be spending most of our time there today. Service and CRM has a couple of them. And again, these are going to be somehow implementing a step of a given workflow, whether that's the sales order workflow from order to pick to invoice to delivery, whatever the case may be. Quick important note is, the security rights. So each grid has its own security rights. So if you've got someone off in the warehouse who's going to be handling just delivered items, you can just say, yep, you get that one. If they're just someone who's doing invoices and you don't want them to deal with deliveries at all, you can say, no, you can have delivered, not invoiced. So you know which deliveries need actioning and invoicing, but they're not going to have access to the opposite, its counterparty. And of course, what are the advantages to all these management grids? The main two that we see, although of course there's an absolute smattering, but the key ones are going to be saving time because you've got a lot more information at your fingertips, and also it can let you create intelligent, data-driven processes that are based on what you want to see in your organization, because it's one of those very general principles that we have at Sybiz, is that every business is going to be different, so we want to deliver you the tools to make the best process for you. So very quick again, top level overview. These are going to be the grids that we are covering today. You're going to see these are going to be under the purchase and debtors ribbons, and there's that button purchase management and sales management. A bit later, we are going to be kicking into the software, so you'll be able to see this in a high def, as it were. And these are these secondary grids, which we are going to touch on quickly, which is service, under that service request button, service requests and open service requests, and all those smattering of CRM ones. But as I said, we're not going to be spending too much time on them today, but it does segue perfectly into service and CRM. The main reason that I call these secondary ones is because they don't really carry as much functionality in the same way that the sales and purchase grids do. So the sales and purchase grids have a lot of useful tools in them that will assist directly with workflows, whereas these are sort of more akin to, for example, a products grid, where it is just showing you information. But in saying that, I didn't want to just completely ignore them today because they are still important parts of those service and CRM workflows, and utilizing these grids to the best of their ability, using some of the techniques that we're going to be talking about today, they are going to be helpful. Now, we're going to talk about those techniques later, but let's quickly move on to looking at each of them. So service is going to be mostly your open service requests and service requests. They're mostly the same grid, so obviously we won't cover each one too individually, but the open criteria is extremely pertinent. The main thing that we sort of see in regards to this one, discreetly as it were, is going to be filtering for a specific purpose. So the easiest example I could think of is if you're someone in your organization and you're responsible for invoicing out service requests. So the techs have done their work, they're all sorted, and we're going to go to invoice it. But if you've got, say, 100 or 200 service requests that need invoicing, you have no clue which ones you need to do. And if these are advanced ones, for example, you might actually need to specifically know which service requests are pertinent. So if you open up the open service requests, you can see that there are a lot of different filters in the headers. And if we then proceed to add SI, which is my invoice ready status, yours might be a different set of characters, of course, we can easily filter that list down to a much more specific set of service requests, and then by that you can utilize that information to complete your invoicing. Again, that's a pretty simplistic example, because as I said, there's not as much functionality available in these grids. Again, very quickly brushing over the CRM grids in a similar manner. All the grids in the CRM have that same pattern, which is the open items, whether that's case files, activities, leads, opportunities, and that's just all the open ones, or just mine. So for example, if you have a series of leads and you're the sales manager, let's say, you might want to actually look at everyone's leads because you're the manager. You're going to manage all those people, maybe offer some hints and tips to some of your representatives. But you also just want to see yours because you want to make sure that you're also actioning your own work. So you can have both those grids set up separately, perhaps with separate filters, separate formatting, pardon me, in order to cater to those particular needs. So a couple of quick visual examples, open opportunities and leads. Again, you'll see it's all very, very similar. You've got your columns, you've got your auto filters, that little bar below, and it's going to be pretty simple stuff. So that covers our very quick brief on those secondary management grids. Now we're going to get into more the meat and potatoes, as it were, being the sales and the purchase ones. The main reason we think these are extremely powerful is because they have the power to drive almost the entire sales and purchase workflows. The things we're looking to implement with regards to these in the end result is smart and efficient. So out of the box, if you just open up Vision for the very first time and just open these grids, they're not going to be fantastic. But using the techniques that we talk about today, you're going to bring them to that fantastic level and be able to use them really, again, smart and efficient. Now we're going to just break these grids down into two separate categories. There's the ones that are more transaction finders. So for example, delivered, not invoiced sales orders. You'll never guess what's on that grid. It's sales orders that have been delivered and haven't been invoiced. And they're all exactly how they sound on the tin. And they're sort of one category. And the other one is grids that have a much more broad functionality, but usually it performs a specific function. So for example, sales order line release, which we'll be talking about later, it's a bit more broad in what it does, and it serves a specific function. So it's not just showing you some transactions that you can then take action against. It has a much more broad application. So our general flow here is just going to cover off some sort of broad theory relating to these grids, and then we'll have a look at some examples. So we'll kick off with, I'll say the easier one first, the transaction finders. Generally speaking, they're all going to serve the same broad purpose. It's going to be filtering down in-progress transactions to a specific set of categories. So that example from before, delivered, not invoiced sales orders, again, exactly what you said on what it says on the tin. The main things that we want to be looking at is going to be filtering, conditional formatting, grouping. They're going to be the sort of the three big tools that you may already be using on your grids, but you may only be partially using, you may be using one of those. And if you combine all three, you can really drill down to finding the exact information you want as fast as you want, and also take action against those transactions in the best way possible. It is worth noting that the items are tied to user state, so what works for you might not work for your colleague across the office. And to that end, you can have separate grids set up for each of them. Even if you're both doing invoicing, you might be doing invoicing for South Australia and your colleague across the way might be doing invoicing for Victoria, and you can set up separate filters to accommodate for those different needs, and that's completely doable. So we've got a few examples. We want to show off some single versus multi-select grids because there are some differences, and a quick example of filtering and a quick example of conditional formatting. And hopefully when we get through all of those, you're going to know a bit more about how to best get the most out of those grids. But very quickly first, we'll just cover what I'm sort of defining as the transaction finders, and it is most of them. So again, these are specific ones which do exactly what they say on the tin. All saved sales orders is sales orders that are saved. All outstanding sales picks is sales picks that are outstanding, and so on and so forth. Again, it's not worth the time to go into every single one individually. So we'll just come up with some broad examples, and these can be then applied to whichever grids happen to be specifically interesting to your particular workflow. So first of all, single versus multi-select grids. So generally speaking, the very broad ones are going to be single select. So here's a good one example. We've got the sales orders all outstanding grid, and this grid has a lot of columns. It shows you the current delivery status, current invoice status. Again, pretty basic stuff really. And in regards to this, you're only going to be able to select one at a time because it doesn't really make sense in this grid to be able to select every sales order and do something to it, because what you might want to do is quite broad. However, we can compare that to, for example, sales orders delivered, not invoiced. You might be coming through every day and you might say, okay, well, I want to just get rid of everything. Anything that's been delivered, not invoiced, I'm invoicing it right now. My job is I get up, go to work, 9:30 a.m., I'm invoicing everything that's been delivered. And that's it. So in this case, it makes a lot more sense to want to multi-select. And you can see on the left there, you've got those check boxes, and you can select all of them. You can select them one by one. But I do think there is a better way. Now, I'm going to use an example based on grouping by customer code. But in theory, this same technique could be applied to anything. It could be based on transaction date. It could be based on anything else, really. The world is your oyster, but customer code generally is going to make the most sense. So if you right click the column header, in this case, order customer code, it's going to bring up the context menu. And in this case, we're going to select group by this column. You can also drag the column with a hold left click and drag it over, but the right click's generally, in my opinion, a little bit easier. And what this is going to do is, as suspected, it's going to group that grid up by the order customer code. So in my case, I've got 3 outstanding orders for customer C003. As we can see here, the column has popped up into that grouping section. In theory, you can also do multi-layered grouping. So you can group by customer code and date or some other combination therein. But for the moment, we've just sort of kept it a bit simple and just left it as order customer code. Now you'll note here that I've actually selected the group, and each individual group now actually has a select box, which when you click that, it's going to select all items within that group. Now what this is going to further let you do is, assuming that you have your items grouped, you can now right click I'll call it the group header, and then this is going to pop up another context menu, and it's going to let you actually open up an invoice. And it's going to invoice based on these selected orders. Now, a key advantage to this is, instead of having to open up your invoice screen, hit the add document button, then you're going to have to add the orders that you want. This is just going to create an invoice, bang, done. And as you'll notice here, we've got multiple lines, but most pertinently, we have all the sales orders automatically added as source transactions. So this is going to appropriately action those orders as you would expect. And all three of them have been automatically added. There was no extra clicking required. What you've seen in that screenshot list, as it were, was exactly what you would expect. As a quick note, let's back it off, there is invoice all and invoice all delivered. So in theory, you may want to automatically just say, yes, everything's going to be invoiced, and that's going to save you a couple of extra clicks when you do actually get to the invoice screen instead of using the update lines functionalities. But of course, in this case, we're just keeping the example simple. There are a couple of quick notes though relating to multi-select, which are going to be important to remember. And of course, this is a perfect opportunity as we present a wall of text to remind you the recording will be available later, so you can review at your convenience. The only items that are combined into one transaction if grouped are the ones that are grouped and selected. You can select an absolute ton of transactions at once, and that's totally fine, even if you can just ignore all that grouping stuff and select everything, but it is going to create transactions one by one. So it's not going to create that grouped up experience like I just showed, where it's got multiple orders on the same transaction. Now that's perfectly fine. That might be totally acceptable, but that also kicks into that second note, which is that the software does, for lack of a better phrase, lock until you've processed all the pertinent transactions that you created with that multi-select. The reason for this is because the system essentially, it has to keep track of what's going on here, because it needs to present transaction 1 based on this sales order, transaction 2 based on this sales order, and it doesn't want to lose its place, as it were. So if you're going to select 10 invoices, they're all going to transact separately, because let's say you have grouped them, you are going to need to action all 10 of them before you can continue with your other work. So if you are going to create these huge swaths, these huge batches of, in this case, let's say invoices, make sure that's exactly what you want to do. Or alternatively, as discussed, use things like grouping, use things like selecting appropriately within your groups to make sure you don't accidentally end up in a situation where you've got to use the task manager to close out vision. Going to be much, much cleaner to sort of, so to speak, get it right the first time to the best of your abilities. And this sort of also kicks on to the next 2 points, which is going to be filtering and conditional formatting. So filtering, in regards to filtering, you would have seen those auto filter rows that we've had before. And in regards to those, if you click this little, I don't know what you want to call it, like a symbol, depending on the type of field it is. So for example, base total is a number, so you can't get textual comparisons. You can only get numerical ones. You're going to get a series of options. Now, most people, with regards to text, contains or begins with is going to be perfect, but in some cases, you might want to be looking for a much more specific set of ideas. For example, ends with or is like, which are much more loose comparisons. So you might want to create these more complicated filters, or in regards to numbers, just specific numbers. Like you might, for example, you might want to look at all orders that don't equal 0. It's a great example there. In regards to these auto filters, there is one important note. You are going to need to make sure that on the grid you've got selected, you right click one of the headers and you want to make sure that it says turn save filters off. So if it says turn save filters off, that means they're on. And conversely, if it says turn save filters on, it means they're off, because the button is what the action is going to do. So otherwise, now obviously some people might not want their filters to be saved, so obviously make sure it suits whatever you need in particular, but it is important to note that, yeah, if your filters that you want to save aren't, double check that setting, which segues us perfectly with this context menu into the filter editor. Now the filter editor is an extremely, extremely powerful tool, which is going to let you create very complex sets of filters. So the auto filtering, let's quickly kick back. The auto filters here are pretty simple, right? It's, customer code contains, let's say you want all the customer codes that begin with the letter C, because you've got a setup that's a specific type of customer, and base total doesn't equal to 0. That's perfect. That's, nothing wrong with that. But it's certainly nowhere near the limit of power that you can do. And the filter editor is going to let you unlock a lot of that power. So when you're presented with this, you're going to just see exactly this screen. It's going to say the word and, you're going to have this plus and a grayed out X. When you hit the plus, it's going to say add condition, add group. A condition is a specific idea. For example, base total is not equal to 0, whereas a group is a collection of ideas. So in regards to the and keyword, it might be that order customer is equal to a particular code, let's say X123, and base total is equal to 0. So when you create a new condition, which I'll focus on because that's the big one, you're going to have 3 things here. You're going to have the field, so what field you're comparing to. You're going to have the criteria, so what you're comparing against. So for example, that might be equals, is between for a number, begins with, is not blank, etc. and so on. There's all those options on the left. And then the value, so that's naturally what the value you're comparing against. Again, base total is not 0 and so forth. It's also worth noting that if you've got a date that you're comparing with, you get a lot of extra conditions that you can use as criteria. And these are, in my view, extremely powerful because you can say, okay, well, what's happening next week? What happens today? What happened earlier in the year? And so on and so forth. And yeah, it can be extremely potent in order to create grids that are exactly what you want to see at a given time. And so here's just a very quick example. I've got the sales order, all outstanding grid here. And as you can see, there's about 20, 25 rows, and that's too many for me. I don't want to see all of that because I've actually got a very specific thing in mind that I want to see. I want to see all my specific customers that begin with the letter C. And I also don't want to see C004 because they're on stop. Let's say they're on stop invoices because they haven't paid their bills. I only want to get the orders above $100 because I don't care about the silly little ones. And I also only want the orders that are from 2 specific users, which is the administrator or Jimmy. And with that filtering, as you can see, we've gone from quite a few to quite a few less. And this in theory could be crafted further, as the case may be. For example, I haven't even looked at touching the idea of delivery status or invoice status, or can I fully pick it? So maybe I only want to look at only orders that are ready to go. Perhaps, again, there are so many options, and what is going to work best for you is going to depend on exactly your role within an organization, as well as how your organization operates in the more general sense. We always encourage conversations with your business partners in relation to this. They're going to be able to help you sort of drill down into the real questions, because you might sort of think about some ideas, and because with your business partner's experience and knowledge of your organization, they're going to be able to drill down and really create some great stuff for you. Moving on to our third and final example for this section is going to be conditional formatting. Now, for those of you who are avid Excel users, you're going to be very familiar with this, at the very least the general pattern, but we'll go through a couple of key things. So the main 2 pieces of conditional formatting that I would see is going to be your cell value is the first one. So cell value is going to be a very basic idea. Cell value is greater than, less than, or equal to, and you're going to choose a particular column, which you'll see highlighted there, which in this case I've used as base total. So in this particular example, we're just highlighting any order over $1,000, and we're just highlighting the whole row in green. Pretty simple stuff. More pertinently, though, most likely is going to be this user formula to determine which cells to format option. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong with the other ones. They're certainly extremely potent. But in regards to the management grids, I would say a bit less so, because you're probably going to want to look for some very specific things. Now, you'll recognize that little edit the rule description section because it looks rather similar actually to our, pardon me, it looks rather similar to our filter editor from before, and that's exactly right. They are very similar items. So for example, here I've got a rule that says if the order customer is a particular one, let's say that's a particularly special customer for me, and the transaction date is less than today, where my current date is the 29th of November last year, we're going to highlight that in red, change the text color to white and make it bold, because let's say this is a really important customer and I want to make sure these orders are going out ASAP, no messing around. So we're going to highlight this really garish color. And in theory, once again, you could create an absolute soiree of rules. Maybe you want to highlight in a particularly, again, like a particularly ugly color set and scheme, an extremely specific set of criteria, and you could just create all of that within the rules description there. And the rules there are very similar to the filter editor that we went through before. The format button there, so I've got a highlight of that, but yeah, the format button is there, and that's how you select what color scheme, fonting that you want to do with regards to the rule. What I thought was coming next was the note regarding the fact that all the rules that apply are going to apply in order, top to bottom. So it's important to get your ordering correct. So for example, in this case, we've got our base total is over 1,000 rule, which is coming after our order customer is equal to C003 and transaction date is less than today rule. Because the first rule and the second rule both apply to this particular line, it's created what could best be described as a mistake. So in this case, I would probably want to maybe a lot more specific about my rule set. I would probably want to move my cell value base total one up in the order, because that's less important. So it is important. The main theme here is that it's very important to make sure your ordering is correct based on what you want to achieve from your conditional formatting. And again, that comes back to the idea of, if in doubt, chat with your business partners, get an idea of what your problem is, what you're trying to solve, and then from there, achieve something great with your management group. So that covers off most of the transactional finders. Again, I've really only scratched the surface with how much you can do with the filtering and conditional formatting and so forth. But the multi-select and the grouping is, of course, very potent. So I would definitely suggest having a look at that if you haven't before. But we are now going to move on to the functional grid. So these are three main ones here: purchase requisition management, suggest purchase orders, and sales order line release. Pardon me. And each has a unique set. In saying that though, some of you might have been expecting some discussion about suggested purchase orders. We're going to be covering that off in a separate webinar. It's a lot to cover, and I don't know about you, but I want to go to lunch today, not tomorrow. So I want to go to Friday's lunch on Friday. So we're going to say, put that in park, and we'll cover that off separately. Very, very, very quickly, suggested purchase orders, you've got your options on the left. You've got to make sure your products are edited accordingly, because if your reorder levels and your maximum levels aren't accurate, that's going to be all wacky. Then you've got to make sure you're considering all your sales history, your quantities on hand, and your movement history, and all your purchases and sales orders that are currently there. Consider your forced quantity and suggested quantity, edit accordingly. Then you've got to make sure, as you can see, it's very complex. So we definitely want to make sure that you're using that the best way possible. We're going to cover that off in a separate webinar with a lot more detail than the absolute mess that's on the screen right now. So stay tuned. That's going to be coming up in a couple of months. So more detail to come. Purchase requisition management, however, is a bit more easy to cover. It is going to serve both sides of the requisition process. In saying that, it's probably more useful for those who are approving as opposed to requisitioning. Just like the transaction finders, you can filter, conditional format, etc., etc. I'm not going to go through specific examples in relation to this grid on those items, but suffice to say that it is an option for you. There's three tabs on the grid. My requested is probably what you're going to use the most as a requisition, or someone who's asking for things. Awaiting approval is probably again the key grid you're going to use as an approver. And approved is going to be a bit of extra functionality to easily get those approved requisitions into orders. So here's an example quickly. I've got my requested and awaiting approval, and I'm logged in as the administrator. So in my case, I've raised a series of requisitions, which are all waiting on Jimmy to approve them. And then when I go to awaiting approval, Jimmy has actually asked for a few things and I'm the next assessor. So in regards to those, I could easily double click those requisitions, approve or reject accordingly. And then once they are approved, assuming that they are approved, that is, you can then go to the Approve tab, right-click a given requisition, and just one click create a purchase order. Or if you just want to go straight to invoice, straight to an invoice. Okay, so next is going to be the sales order line release. This is going to be mostly pertinent for those of you who are using picking. For those of you who aren't using picking, this is completely useless. If you don't use picking at all, this will actually be grayed out in your sales management list options. However, in saying that, if you are using picking, extremely potent tool to much more easily get visualization of what can go out the door, what can't, and then actually take action in regards to that, generating picks accordingly. So there's a few options that are available on the sales order line release. Left-hand side, as it were, says picking grouping. So this is relating to actually how the picks are generated. So they might be generated by order number, they might be generated by customer, and that's really going to depend a lot. There's an absolute metric ton of options in that drop down. It's mostly going to depend on how your warehouse is set up, most likely. For example, I think product sort code is one of them. Off the top of my head, we're going to be going into the software in a second, so we can check that. But your warehouse is going to drive a lot of that decision making in that regard. Fully pick line, there's a lot of selection that goes on in relation to the sales order line release grid, and fully pick line essentially says if you can't fully pick it, ignore it. Auto generate, so there's that generate button there. Once you've selected a series of sales order lines to release, you've got the option of just having those picks automatically get processed, or to have those picks pop up on screen so you can action them. You might want to, for example, specifically assign them to particular pickers. You might want to add some notes to each pick. And in that case, you probably want to turn auto generate off so you can take those actions accordingly. Alternatively, if you're just like, stuff it, just get it out the door, done, problem solved, leave auto generate on, and you're not going to have to action potentially 5, 10, 15, 20 picks. And finally, there's the stop deliveries option, which it reads the customer record, and if they're on stop deliveries, it's going to prevent them from being selected at all. Now, this might be pertinent. Again, this is where it comes down to it. It might depend on your organization as to why you have stop deliveries against a given customer. For example, if you have stop deliveries there just because you don't have an address for them, so you don't actually know where to send it, you might not mind picking for those customers, and then you can just follow up with them and say, hey, stuff's ready to go. Can we get it out the door, please? Give me an address to send it to. But you might also have them on stop deliveries because they haven't been paying their bills, in which case they're not getting no goods. So you definitely want to have stop deliveries on. So sales order line release, workflow example, no screenshots here. So we're going to head into the software. Just one sec as I log back in, because I evidently closed the software just before I started the presentation, which was extremely silly. Fortunately, everything is mostly ready to go, so it shouldn't be too much of a hassle to get it back up. Okay, so we're going to share this window now, and it looks like perfect. That has got my Sybiz Vision live. Excellent. Working exactly the way I like it. So we have 4 products here that we have got for our example. And each of them, I won't go into each of them, you can just trust me, each of them have exactly 10 units on hand. And that's going to be pertinent here. One of the main reasons you're going to want to use sales order line release is going to be because of limited stock. In theory, if you have unlimited stock, you're probably not doing picking in the first place, so this thing is useless. But obviously, if you do have a lot more limited stock, like most organizations, knowing how much you've got on hand and knowing how much you can send out the door is going to be very pertinent. I'll just very, very quickly, before I go into the sales order line release, I'll just quickly show off where these management grids have been, just in a live setting could be handy. So creditors ribbon, followed by purchase management, and that's going to get all your purchase management items. And you've got debtors, similarly sales management, There's obviously a few other options here, but I certainly wouldn't call them management grids. And then similar over here, over to service requests, and then CRM, then you've got your case files, your activities, your leads, and your opportunities. So just wanted to very, very quickly show that off while we had the opportunity. Firstly, of course, as I said, the sales order line release grid is going to be completely turned off for you if you don't have use sales picks on in your data defaults. So that's certainly something that is going to be worth double checking if you can't find it. So sales order line release. So first thing, let's go double check here quickly. So picking grouping was that one I just wasn't sure off the top of my head. There you go. So customer sort code, product sort code, analysis code, sales representative, or all. So again, absolute soiree of options, and it's going to depend on what works best for you. Now, this is the totally default layout of the sales order line release grid. And as you can see, it's an absolute hodgepodge, I'd say. There's not too much useful information you can glean just by looking at this, which is, might be useful enough for you, but obviously we can do better. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, sales order line release is a line level idea. So now all these sales orders in my examples are exactly one line. But of course, if you had multiple lines for sales orders, which I'm sure most of you would, you are going to see multiple lines per sales order. So first up, what I would probably suggest is figuring out some kind of grouping. Now, you might care more about grouping by your customers because you might say, okay, well, this set of customers is more important than this set of customers. So I'm going to group by customer group. For our example, just to make things a bit clearer, I'm going to group by product description, and I'll show you why I think product description is at least a good starting point. The main thing you're going to be doing, or at least one of the main things to at least start you off in regards to sales order line release, is going to be right-clicking any of these headers and hitting select all. Now, a series of items here have been selected, and it's seemingly random. Now, in my case, it actually does kind of not look too bad because all my sales orders happen to be in a row. But if this was actually like a real world example, this would essentially be a complete mess. But what's actually occurring in the background is that it's taking what's effectively a calculation and determining what items are good to be picked. And that's going to be a lot easier to see if we group by product. So I'm going to say product description, could be code as well, but whichever works. Now, I have 4 examples here, and I just need to make sure I remember exactly which ones are which. Okay, excellent. So the main thing that is going to be pertinent is going to be transaction date. Transaction date governs a lot of what gets chosen and not chosen. So we're going to start with our generic gizmo. In this case, we've got an order for the 1st of February, 2nd of February, and 3rd of February, and each of them are for 5 items where I have 10 available. If I press select all in the most basic sense, you will notice that the 1st and the 2nd got selected, but now I'm out of stock. So the 3rd is unselected entirely. So that's pretty simple, easy enough to understand. In regards to the devilish doodad, I have on the 1st, I have an order for 12 units, again, noting that I only have 10. And then on the 2nd and the 3rd, I have another 8 units in total. You'll note that if I press select all, 10 units are selected to pick for the first line here, and then the others are just ignored because no more stock, right? This is where that fully pick line option comes in. If I actually select fully pick line, and now I press select all, you'll notice now that the first line gets completely ignored on the basis of the fact that I cannot fully pick that line. Pardon me. However, now, because I now have those 10 units free and ready to go, I now have those second 2 lines selected. It's also worth noting, and this is an important thing here. Let's say I said, okay, well, actually, because I can't fully pick this top line, I don't want to do it, but you know what, we might be able to get a couple of units out of our doodads. So you know what, whatever we've got left after we fulfill the rest of the orders, let's just assign that. You'll notice that the available column has actually changed. So I'll just quickly show that off again. So when we unselect, available is 10. When we do select, the available is now 2 because we've used 8 units. So I can actually just manually change this. Type in, where's, oh, that's right. So it won't let me do that because of the option. And that's exactly what I wanted. But in theory, I could also just unselect it and now type away. So there you go. So a lot of the sales order line release, and this is sort of what I'm trying to get at, as it were, is you do the select all, and that might be a great first step, but it's probably not going to be your ending step. And this is actually perfectly encapsulated via this particular item. The tumultuous thingy-majig has a order outstanding for it that has Kellogg's cereal on stop deliveries. Now, you'll notice I do have the stop deliveries check mark enabled, but it has still selected it. This is because it is essentially a warning. Well, it is a preventative warning, but it's not something that will actually prevent selection in the select all routine. However, this is also where filtering can come in. So using my example before, let's say the only reason why I have stop deliveries is because I don't have a delivery address, for example. In theory, I probably don't mind picking, but I do want to know. So I want to leave stop deliveries on, and I actually don't mind. So I now know I can make a note here. I can make a note off to the side, contact Kellogg's, get delivery address, but then I can untick out stop deliveries, and I'll now be allowed to pick this line. Conversely, though, let's say I tick stop deliveries back on, and I really don't want to deliver. Let's flip to our other side of the example, wherein the only reason they're on stop deliveries is because I haven't paid their bills. So let's actually filter down here. We've right-clicked the column header. We've gone to our filter header, and we're going to filter just for stop deliveries being unchecked. That now completely disappears that line because, of course, it does not fulfill the criteria. And now when we do a select all, you'll now note that both lines have been selected to a net of 10. This is because part of the select all is actually visually based. So if you've filtered away a particular line for one reason or the other, whether it's stop deliveries, whether it's some other reason, that will make the system think that it does not exist, at least for the purposes of the select all. So that could be handy. But again, that's going to depend on exactly what you want or need out of the system. Our final example here is the wacky widget, which has a priority line on it. Now I'll just quickly, once again, let's do an unselect all, select all, just to demonstrate that the priority does not actually come into it in regards to whether it's being selected above other lines or not, in regards to the select all routine. However, this is where I would argue that conditional formatting is going to come in extremely handy. So if I go for, let's not do a highlight cell, let's go and we're going to delete this rule. We're going to use a formula. We're going to say that if priority equals true, we're just going to fill the line up as green. So use a formula to determine which cells to format. Priority is checked, and we're going to choose our formatting cell fill as green. We're going to apply that to the whole row, apply. And now we can very easily see here, yes, even though I did actually do a select all and it hasn't been selected, I should probably action this. In theory, you could actually even make I just thought of this off the top of my head, you could actually make this rule even better. Because if I've actually actioned the priority line, I probably actually don't care anymore. So I actually want to say, and selected is false, because once I've actioned it, I've actioned it. So in this case, for example, let's say, okay, well, I've noticed that priority line's there and it's unactioned. So we're going to assign the 5 units there available, and now it's done. So it can disappear into the sunset accordingly, and no worries. And then I've got one item left, so maybe I'll pick one item for facsimile smiles, maybe I won't. Again, that's going to really depend on what you need. And that's another example of how conditional formatting can be very powerful in order to take an action, but not necessarily clutter the screen with useless formatting. Once I've taken the action, the formatting has gone away. That is the basics. I would say that's, again, I don't hesitate to say that I'm merely scratching the surface because there's so much depth. Again, we wanted to fit all this into an hour and there was a lot to cover. So I've covered off a lot of the things that I think are extremely powerful, but in regards to what specifically works best for you and your organization, once again, can't hesitate to say, speak to your business partner. If in doubt, you can give us an email. At the very worst, we can, assist and liaise with your business partner. Because when it comes down to it, our end goal is to make sure that you're using the software and getting the most out of it to its best potential. And I think that some of the things that we have gone over today move towards that goal. So we're going to kick back to the slideshow now just to quickly do a bit of conclusion. Because I do think we are nearing the end of our time. So management grids, in essence, the main thing they're going to do is save you time. Through being able to make better process-driven decisions, they're going to be able to save you time when you put in the work to make them work for you. As I said, out of the box, you're going to open them the first time and it's just going to be a lot of lines on a screen. You put in some conditional formatting, some filtering, some grouping, and more. And it's going to do some absolute wonderful stuff for you. And in some cases, of course, those management grids are going to add additional functionality. Suggested purchase orders, which again, we'll come back to. Sales order line release, great examples of those. Of course, if you do have any questions about anything that's been covered today, get in touch with your Sybiz authorized business partner or us. Further detail, clarification, no worries. If you've got anything that you need covering, we'll make sure you are sorted. Of course, we can't let you go without talking about the next one, which, as said, is going to be stock management featuring suggested purchase orders. We're going to cover a bit of sort of general stock management in the vision context, but of course, focusing on that suggested purchase orders grid and getting the most you can out of it, or at the very least, putting you on the path to getting the most out of it. There's going to be further communication in regards to that via emails and newsletters, so make sure you check those out. And also, we're more than happy to take some ideas for further webinars. We've got a lot of months to cover in 2024. So if you've got something you think is going to be a really neat idea for a webinar, get in touch. The email to really get in touch with is going to be sybiz@sybiz.com. So do pen a quick email, drop us a line, and we'll see what we can do. At this point, it is 12:18. We were planning to go for no longer than an hour, which means we've got a couple of minutes for any questions, if any have come in.
Hey there, Ethan. All of the questions have been dealt with, so yeah, you're free to clock off if you like.
Beautiful, thank you very much. And yes, of course, thank you to everyone who's assisted, Ben in particular for moderating that chat, and everyone who's assisted internally here. And of course, to all of you for your time this Friday. So once again, if you do have any further questions, I know I always, you watch something, you've got the opportunity to ask questions live, and then 5 minutes after the presenter goes offline, you think of 15 more. Sybiz@sybiz.com is going to be the place to get in touch, and we're more than happy to field those additional questions afterwards. Beyond that, though, I say all the best to you, all the best for the weekend. Hopefully you'll have a good Friday lunch and a weekend, and I'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.